Greetings. It's my great pleasure to welcome you here this afternoon to the Data Science Research Institute's distinguished lecture featuring Matt Hepburn. So when DSRI was established, we sought to accelerate research collaborations on campus. But really our goal is to, moreover, generate excitement and increase participation in data science research. And I think that this activity here today reflects this goal. In particular, there's I think some 200, maybe 250 folks online who are participating remotely. In the first year, Data Science Research Institute is focused on research related to infectious disease. We've worked with the Center for Metabolomics and Infectious Disease, the One Health Institute, the Infectious Disease Research and Response Network, and through these preliminary collaborations, we're establishing a CSU data repository, which we hope over the years will accelerate data science research. So it's only fitting, really, to have someone as illustrious as Matt Hepburn here today, who I think really reflects the excitement that we want to bring to infectious disease research here. So Matt's a national leader in the development of medical countermeasures to combat infectious disease. So at this point, I'll turn it over now to President Joyce McConnell to open the event.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's really extraordinary to see this many people and know this many people are online late on a Friday afternoon. I want to thank Dr. Kirby for introducing me. Thank you so much. And we're extraordinarily pleased to have Dr. Hepburn here today to kick off the inaugural Distinguished Speaker Series for the Data Science Research Institute. His talk actually could not be more relevant. American Pandemic Preparedness Plan and how innovations in data science can help to accomplish the ambitious goal of preventing future pandemics. And I think preventing future pandemics is on all of our minds. Dr. Hepburn has a history of funding CSU work. Thank you very much for that. Particularly Dr. Kirby, senior math faculty who founded our Data Science Research Institute in 2019-2020 with the Office of the Vice President for Research Support. Matt has funded Mike and others to apply artificial intelligence to biomarkers of disease to be more predictive about who will get sick and when, and maybe we would add how. Land grants like CSU have a very long history of ecosystem health. We are prepared to bring a One Health approach, people, animals, and the environment to building a more resilient future in health. And we are building a future of pandemic resilience that requires new ways of thinking in terms of prevention and response. And we have responded on a regional and national level in unprecedented ways to the pandemic. We've performed over 250,000 tests over the last year using both wastewater and pooled saliva. As a result, among the highest rate of in-person learning during the pandemic at CSU has directly benefited our students. We've created new vaccines, new diagnostics, and new programs that will address health disparities resulting from the pandemic. CSU was relied upon at a national level using resources and assets created here during past outbreaks. The NIH Regional Center of Excellence in Infectious Disease, Biocontainment Research Laboratories, and our Vet Diagnostic Lab were converted to help Colorado COVID response. I want to pause here for a minute and tell you that as a relatively new president at the time that all of this happened, I was 7 months into my presidency, and I didn't even know who all these players were. And yet what I want to say is they exhibited the best teamwork, collaboration, and that land-grant spirit of rolling up their sleeves and getting whatever had to be done. And every once in a while, they let me know what they were doing, which is how it should be. I just knew not to stand in their way. That was the most important. But only being here for 7 months, I learned very, very quickly the power of this university and the people within it, particularly their ability to work together for a common purpose. I used to say a common enemy, but maybe common purpose is better. We are prepared to extend these assets to other threats, to many other issues, including animal production systems. We're very, very aware of what's going on with African swine fever, for example. But we have had a 150-year legacy here of studying diseases that leap from animals to humans. And that is part of what made us so powerful, is that real foundation in that kind of work. But then CSU realized the need for more data, and we created the Data Science Research Institute during smack dab in the middle of the pandemic. We recognize the importance of data collection, integration, analysis, and data-driven decision-making in a more resilient future for pandemics. We're harnessing the data-rich world that we live in with an interdisciplinary mindset, which is one of the powerful characteristics of this university. More than 65 affiliated faculty across CSU's 8 colleges participated in this work. Many of you are in this room today or are watching remotely. So a heartfelt thanks to all of you for everything you did. All those 24/7 weeks really made a difference for us. And each and every day that our students are fully engaged back on campus and face-to-face learning, they may not know your names, but they're thanking each and every one of you. Researchers doing this work have established deep data sets associated with the pandemic, including our senior care workforce surveillance for COVID across the entire state of Colorado. These assets will provide a critical foundation for applying tools of artificial intelligence and machine learning to help us learn more about the transmission of pandemics and how we might intervene earlier and make a difference. We recognize CSU's role in training the next generation of outbreak and pandemic researchers and responders. We started new graduate fellowships in pandemic resilience, which recognizes the role we play in developing much-needed diverse workforce that understands the importance of technology and also the disparities in access to healthcare. As a land-grant university, we also understand that our training must address the social, cultural, and communication barriers that really stand in the way of being able to effectively apply the knowledge that we gain. Our extension and engagement program allows us unique access to the entire state of Colorado and allowed us to reach communities and facilities and transfer knowledge in ways that we would not have been able to had we not had that infrastructure in place. This has been an extraordinary 18 months. It has really, really tested the fiber of this university, and we know that we're only stronger. So it's my great honor now to introduce Alan Rudolph, who is our Vice President for Research.
Thank you, President McConnell. It's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Hepburn. Dr. Hepburn recently joined on October 1st at the Office of Science and Technology Policy at the White House as an infectious disease specialist, where he'll take a principal role in the Biden administration's future pandemic response. His most recent role before coming to the White House was as the vaccine development lead for the Countermeasure Acceleration Group, formerly known as Operation Warp Speed. Prior to this position, Dr. Hepburn served as the Joint Project Lead of Enabling Technologies for the Joint Program Executive Office for the Pentagon, and in this role, he was responsible for establishing a start-to-finish capability to develop vaccines and therapeutic solutions against current, future biological threats. Due to the creation of this foundational capability, the team implemented the Department of Defense Vaccine Acceleration Project, which provided key investments to advance vaccines and antibody therapeutic efforts, with special emphasis on acceleration of manufacturing these products and clinical trials. Dr. Hepburn served for 23 years in the United States Army as an infectious disease physician, retiring as a colonel, and his final assignment was as a program manager at DARPA. Concurrent with the first 2 years at DARPA, Dr. Hepburn also served on the research and development team at the newly Research and Development Acquisitions Director at the Defense Health Agency. And in 2010 to 2013, he serves as Director of Medical Preparedness on the White House National Security Staff. Dr. Hepburn completed his infectious disease fellowship and internal medicine residency training at Brooke Army Medical Center in San Antonio, Texas, and he received his medical degree and undergraduate degree in biomedical engineering from Duke University. It's my pleasure to introduce my friend, Dr. Matt Hepburn.
Thank you. Okay, can you hear me okay? Okay, so the theme here, because Ellen and I are both DARPA alumni, so with DARPA, we would like to shake things up, do things a little bit differently. I had a slide deck. I may do 1 or 2 slides. I just actually want to speak to you here, so if the camera, are we good on camera? Can everybody see me? Fantastic. So I want to start with a very, very sincere thank you for inviting me to speak, for hosting me here today. I have been absolutely blown away. I've been truly, truly blown away. I'm a very candid person, so I will tell you, well, Colorado State, you could do better here. Absolutely not the case. It has been, we've spent the day with students, with meetings on the biotech ecosystem, with seeing some of the different facilities, with talking about your manufacturing facility, all the great work that you've been doing at Colorado State and in this community during the pandemic, and I'm absolutely blown away. It is truly extraordinary. And President McConnell, I think you summed it up really well. I want to thank this community for their service to our nation in this pandemic. And so give yourselves a round of applause. All right. I'd applause, but I got to hold this. It is amazing. I think one of the things that I want to talk about a little bit in terms of pandemic, in terms of the pandemic, in terms of Operation Warp Speed, as well as my new role in how do we prevent and how do we make sure that something like this never happens again, is to present a message of hope. And it's a difficult message to present. I think we've all, we have to start this conversation in terms of the struggle that we've gone through as a nation and that we've gone through individually. I have a slide, if we go to, that I'm happy to show or not. Just to kind of remind ourselves just truly, truly how awful this has been. I think one of the, we can talk about statistics all day long. I was recently, we recently had World AIDS Day, and I was reading there's a new White House strategy on HIV, and HIV as a horrific, terrible, decades-long pandemic that we've all experienced. But I think that the total number of deaths from HIV in the United States has been sort of less than the numbers that we've had dying from COVID. Just to help us appreciate the magnitude of what's going on, to appreciate the magnitude of more than 1,000 Americans a day are dying. And we have, and that's, again, that's the start point. We all know this, but it's our healthcare systems getting overwhelmed. It's the personal isolation that we've experienced. And, you know, some of you have been sick with COVID. Clearly, you've had friends, relatives who have at least been sick with COVID, if not dying from COVID. And I have too. And it is it has been horrible, it has been tragic, it has torn at our individual souls, it's torn at our national soul. Having said that, and I think we acknowledge that, but my message today is that there have been some amazing things that have come from this pandemic that have currently happened or that have happened over the last 18 months that we've done as a nation, and that the future, if we learn those lessons, if we set new normal on all these things that we have learned from this pandemic, I think our future as a nation is very bright, and I think our future can be a future that we're going to have infectious diseases with us always, but we can imagine a future without pandemics. I want to start with talking a little bit about an example there in my own experience, which was Operation Warp Speed. So I had the privilege of serving on that team from the time, essentially, it was announced on the Rose Garden ceremony on May 15th. I joined the team essentially a day later. I was supposed to be a Department of Defense representative for that team. I ended up, the vaccine development lead was Peter Marks. He went back to FDA, and he's a national hero, the work that he did at FDA in terms of the vaccine reviews and such. But I had the opportunity to be a vaccine development lead. So I reflect on that a lot. I oftentimes get a lot of questions. You're welcome to ask me questions on the panel. I can tell stories. But I want to share a couple specific lessons which I think are germane to this Colorado State audience and from some of the things I learned today. The first lesson in terms of why we were successful was one team. And the story I'll tell you is that when we first started Operation Warp Speed, it was this very unique blend of Department of Health and Human Services, and this is the NIH and the CDC, and clearly the public health expertise that we had in our nation. It brought that together with the Department of Defense. And that Department of Defense effort, I was a Department of Defense civilian, but that Department of Defense effort was led by a four-star who spent his career, four-star general, spent his career in logistics. And so it was this really perfect blend of our technical expertise in public health and in terms of medical and vaccine development with the operational experience and the supply chain analysis and the, if you will, again, like a land-grant university, that can-do attitude that the Department of Defense brought. And so when we started, though, we had two different cultures. We had people, and again, we were nothing, and then we were a team of 100 people essentially overnight. And one of the things that happened was we would start meetings, and everybody's like, okay, who are you, where are you from? And we would sort of do these little introductions. And I would say, I'm Matt Hepburn, I'm a Department of Defense civilian, I'm the vaccine development lead. And Monsef Salawi, who was the chief scientific officer and my direct boss, would say, nope, said, you're Operation Warp Speed. You're not Department of Defense, you're not Health and Human Services, you're not NIH, you're not, and I'll expand it, you're not academia, you're not the private sector, you're not Moderna, you're not UPS, you're not Catalent, you're not all of that. We're one team. And so then the next meeting I said, I'm Matt Hepburn, I'm Department of Defense, and so one team. And so I'm a slow learner, I did it about 5 times, but eventually I kind of got the gist of it. And we were, and it was amazing because we were truly integrated as a government for that one singular purpose. And through extension, we were able to partner with the private sector, with the vaccine companies. We were able to partner with the clinical trials organizations and the manufacturing facilities and the UPS and all of the vaccine distribution. And that effort was truly massive. One thing I bring up to remind everyone is that there were literally hundreds of thousands of volunteers who signed up for clinical trials for these 6 vaccines in these large clinical trial studies. You think about that, hundreds of thousands of people rolled up their sleeves. Again, remember, we didn't know. I mean, that's the great thing about a volunteer is that you understand the risks. You understand the risks of the unknown and you still roll up your sleeves. And there are so many stories like that we were one team as a nation on Operation Warp Speed to be able to deliver these vaccines like we did. Colorado State was one team in terms of that pandemic response. And what I want to try to capture is as we talk about future pandemics, and as we talk about what you're doing, be that one team. And how do you get to be a one team? Well, again, I'll quote a General Perna, because what he used to say at the very beginning is he said, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, and you know what you guys are going to do? Everybody's going to check their egos at the door. And what that meant is that the mission was more important than me. And as simple as that sounds, if you think about usually where teams fail, it's because me becomes more important than that team. And so what I really like about what I've seen today, and I've been here before and I know this community well, is that this is a one-team community. Now, what we've talked about a lot today, for those that have attended some of these different sessions, is that it's actually really unique to see a university, to see private sector biotech, and to see government laboratories, government entities that are all in one place, working on the same projects, integrated, and truly one team. It doesn't, those of you that have studied or have been to other universities or other places, it doesn't exist. There are barriers that are put into place. And I think as we think about future pandemics, why are we having those barriers? Because when you bring together academia and the private sector and these government laboratories, and they're all in the same place at the same time, you get the best of all three cultures, you get that unity of effort, and that unity of effort is how we're going to solve super complex problems. So I'm going to talk a little bit about pandemics, but if you're not a pandemics or a biology person, that's okay, I'll forgive you, but just substitute in energy, or climate change, or racism, or all of those problems that our society is taking on. The way that we're going to solve these problems is not about I'm going to solve the problem. It's going to be that we're going to bring these communities together. So it's truly that one team concept. The second point that I love about Warp Speed that we learned is that government can work. And so there is a lot of our government is failing this, our government is failing this, our institutions are dysfunctional. I think I use Operation Warp Speed as an example of where government can provide leadership. But if you want to take that even further, like this whole system that we all participate in can really work. Okay, to take you back to May of 2020, you know, who actually thought that we would have a vaccine, much less two, approved and millions of doses being produced by the end of 2020. So you can raise your hand if you thought you were. I was at a conference where the panelist sitting next to me said, I thought it was. And I was like, well, I didn't. You know, Monsef did, General Perna did. I mean, it was really, no one thought we were going to do this. No one thought we were going to do this. And the people who were most skeptical of us being able to produce a vaccine faster than it had ever been produced before were the vaccine experts. So this idea that, oh, this can't be done, or that this is impossible, like, it wasn't. It just wasn't. And for me, for the rest of my life, I saw it and I lived it, and I'm inspired by that firsthand to show that it can be done. And so my message to you is it can be done. And when you think about, we've spent a lot of time today kind of going through some of the things that before the pandemic, we always said, we really need to do these things for a pandemic. And it was science fiction. We never thought we'd be able to run 1.5 million tests a day in the United States for an infectious disease. I mean, that's unheard of. It's just not going to happen. We never thought we'd have at-home testing. We never thought, I mean, there's a very long list. We never thought we'd be able to develop monoclonal antibodies within a 5-year period or otherwise. We invested in it at DARPA, and we could say, well, maybe we put down some money and we ran some programs there. But the point is, there are so many things that were science fiction that are now kind of our reality. And so why I'm really excited about the future is that especially for people in this room, when it's like, it can't be done because it can. right? Like it really can. And so if you can sort of keep that in mind, and keep that in mind when everybody tells you it can't be done, and when there's the barriers and the bureaucracy and you can't get government funding or whatever else, whatever all the reasons are that you can't accomplish that grandiose or that critically important mission, think about Operation Warp Speed. Think about what Colorado State did for this pandemic response. Think about all these things that we can do now that we couldn't do then as a result of the teamwork, the effort, and really this concept that we have in America that you will be educated at a university, you will work in the private sector, and you will drive towards a common goal. And many times we may fail in those types of things, but at least for Operation Warp Speed, we succeeded when no one else, and certainly the rest of the world didn't think we could. Now, what I want to talk about a little bit is future pandemics. I just want to go through kind of what I'm doing now. And I do want to get into a little bit of data science and some of the things where I think, where Colorado State plays a role in this, and again, why I'm excited about the future. But the key message that I have as we think about future pandemics is that all of the things that we've made progress on, we got to figure out a way to make those the new normal. So a lot of people have talked about what's the new normal for our society, better or for worse. People are working from home. People may be more isolated. People, we're hitting a reset point in a lot of aspects of kind of who we are. Some of that new normal may not be very good. I'm determined, and I hope you're determined, especially in terms of biomedical research and especially in terms of pandemic preparedness, or even solving those big problems, that we set the new normal as that we can get things done. And that the new normal for vaccine development is 18 months. The new normal is you have telehealth appointments, so you don't have to drive in an hour and wait an hour at the doctor's office or anything else. The new normal is we can do at-home testing for lots of different infectious diseases or cancer or other things. There's so many things that now we can reset and we can say these are the new normal. I'm super concerned, though, that we're going to go back to where we were before. So because the new normal is going to take resources. The new normal is going to take, we got to work hard. The new normal is that we're going to have to make a lot of changes that we made during an emergency that a lot of people will say, well, we did this during an emergency, but now we're going to go back to. Let's not go back. So I'm very passionate about this. So in my new role at the Office of Science and Technology Policy, I've been asked to focus on future pandemics. Now, the White House recently released a plan called the American Pandemic Preparedness Plan, and released on September 3rd. And it was really a framework to say, here are some of the main things that we have to do to be able to prevent, to mitigate, to make sure that the next pandemic is not nearly as impactful. There's a lot of stuff in there. We're not going to go over all the details of all of that. What we are really trying to do, though, is we're trying to grab all the lessons learned, some of the things that I've been alluding to. I encourage you to do the same thing. What did we learn from this pandemic? We're trying to grab it. We're trying to write it down and say, we learned this, it was good, we're going to do it. Here was a critical gap. We did not do this well. We're going to put time and effort and a ton of energy into trying to do that much better. So we have essentially 5 pillars. I don't want to go through the whole plan, but what I wanted to do is sort of highlight the pillar and where I think data science plays such a critical role. But the punchline is that I don't have enough time to go over all the ways that data science is going to play a role in future pandemics, because it's ubiquitous. Like, it's everything we do. Everything that we're going to talk about, every word I'm going to say about future pandemics needs data science solutions. And there are some areas where I think we really put the data together, where we were organized and where we did some things very well, and others where we didn't. And so I'm going to try to highlight a little bit of both. So our pillar 1 is the transform medical defenses, and it's kind of a jargony word. What we're trying to get at is we need to make vaccines and therapeutics and diagnostics really fast and make that the new normal. I think in terms of, but when we talk about diagnostics, this is also where we think about healthcare. We think about, is someone getting sick? How sick are they getting? And this alludes to what Michael Kirby was talking about on one of our previous DARPA programs, which was really looking at this idea of, can you discern a signal that will show us that someone is getting sick before they become transmissible or before they become really sick, okay? And the hard part there is to say, well, what signal is most predictive? All of you deal with this signal-to-noise problem. What our premise was is, could you measure something in the blood? Could you look at inflammatory markers? Could you find something, patterns in your vital signs, or something else that would tell us that you're getting sick before you were? And the answer is, it got really complex. Now, one of the things that's super interesting, but I'm telling you, we have to do this really well. One of the things that's been super interesting in this pandemic, and bad, is that this application of AI in health and the ability to predict who's going to get sick and how sick they're going to get hasn't been done really well. We don't have these great, grandiose solutions now that we didn't have a year or two ago. And so this is an area where we have to do better. Fundamentally, a lot of what we do in healthcare is actually trying to predict what's going to happen for patients. Our healthcare decisions are, you're in the emergency department, do you need to be intubated? Do you need to go to the intensive care unit? Can you go home? Are you a candidate for our very expensive monoclonal antibody treatment? All of these things, we're constantly in the business of prediction, right? And so inherently, this should lend itself to, if we have the right data, to our ability then to predict outcome, to predict progression, to predict resolution. It's all about prediction. As we've tried to apply AI in health in these types of predictive models, we haven't done very well. There's been tons of effort in this space. There's been all kinds of algorithms. There's been published papers. But unfortunately, if you have COVID and you go to an emergency department down the road here, they're not going to run any fancy algorithms on you. They're going to be, you're going to get checked in, and they're going to do a PCR test, and then they're going to make a clinical decision. So AI in health has not impacted. Why not? I don't know. So the academic community has to figure that out. But what I think is, it's that classic data problem of garbage in, garbage out. So what has happened is, we haven't collected detailed information systematically on the most important predictors that would then allow us to predict if someone's going to get sick, and then train our data set for that prediction, but then have that be accessible for the heterogeneity that's in the human population. So in other words, we may be able to predict if 80-year-olds and what's going to happen to them, but it's not the same for 30-year-olds. Or if you have diabetes or not, the prediction works for diabetes, doesn't work for something else. But that doesn't really help us. So why am I telling you this story? I'm telling you this story because I'm showing you a critical gap in data science that we absolutely have to solve. And these problems are solvable, especially applying from other fields where you have messy data sets, where you have incomplete data sets, where you have to impute and all that good stuff, and try to create those types of predictions. But right now, we don't have it. Okay, and so one of the areas that I'm obviously obsessed with in how we transform our medical defenses is our ability to predict severity and to be able to then say, this person is sick, this person's going to get sicker, this person doesn't. You can imagine how, if we are able to predict that, how powerful that is for our clinical trials and our product development, right? So in other words, we ran a vaccine clinical trial on 30,000 volunteers. 15,000 got placebo, 15,000 got vaccine. And you follow them over time, you see who gets sick and who doesn't in which groups. If you know a group is extremely high risk, if you know someone's going to go for high risk of populations, you can shape that clinical trial so it's less volunteers, you get it done a lot less expensively, and you get it done a lot sooner. And why is expensive is a big deal, right? I mean, some of these trials are in the neighborhood of hundreds of millions of dollars. And so one of the ways you can turn a $500 million clinical trial to a $50 million clinical trial is making sure that that trial is completely focused on the highest risk people. How do you understand who's that? You're able to predict who's going to get sick or who's going to get sickest. Does that make sense? So I'm highlighting that as one area. The second pillar is ensure situational awareness. It's funny, I'm reading this as I speak, and I'm like, this is so government speak. So I do apologize. I can't rewrite it now. We already made it public. Ensure what we're getting at here is this is the public health surveillance that we all know and we all understand very deeply. I don't have to belabor the point on the I don't think I have to belabor the importance of data science in terms of understanding kind of public health surveillance, population health, all of those patterns. But I will make kind of two quick points. I mean, the first is, I think it's truly extraordinary that the number of COVID positive cases in the United States is knowable with over 1.5 million tests a day, and the ones that are positive, we know that. We know where they come from, and we make it available on the New York Times website and everywhere else in America. Like, it's extraordinarily transparent. So whenever we talk about how bad our system is, there's some good transparency is some of the things that I think we do really well. So we know, we understand this outbreak because we have all that information, and we have that information publicly available. The key in ensuring situational awareness, government term, but sort of for what we need to know from a pandemic is we need to know where we are, but what we really need to know is what's going to happen next, right? So what we really need to know is what's going to happen with Omicron, where is the outbreak going to go, if people have their third dose, are they going to be, and I got mine a couple weeks ago, which I was very happy to receive, and everybody needs one, by the way, public service message, everybody needs a third dose. I don't know, and then you're going to ask me, well, do I need a fourth dose? I don't know, we'll sort it out. But the point is, if everybody gets a third dose, or who gets a third dose, is that going to protect them, and where is it going to go, and does that tamp an outbreak in a certain place or spread somewhere else? You need to know what's going to happen next. Okay, so I can tell you who's getting sick right now, but the data science needs to be really, really good in terms of where is this going to go, what's going to happen next. Because if we know what's going to happen next, then we can do something about that. So if we know our healthcare system's going to be overwhelmed in this state and that the outbreak is going to decrease in that state, we can send resources to one place or another. If we know that we're going to need a lot more vaccine, we can make decisions. If we know that we're going to need more vaccine or more therapeutics in the United States because the outbreak's getting a lot worse, we'll keep it here. If we don't need it, we can send it and we can take care of this global pandemic, which requires a global response. And I think we would all agree. I think the United States needs to be a critical part of that global response. So if we can figure out what's happening next through data science, we can make all kinds of decisions to mitigate and ultimately prevent the outbreak. Third is strengthening public health systems. Again, can go into a lot of details here, but where I think it becomes particularly kind of interesting and important is this idea of how we contain a contagious infection. So what I mean by that is, if someone is sick, how do we know, number one, if they're going to spread it to other people, and number two, what we can do about that? And when we think about the complexity of that, if we understand, so COVID, we've had some time, we're starting to understand how it's transmitted. For future pandemics, we're going to need that capability right away. Why? Because should we isolate somebody? How long should we isolate someone for? Should we isolate their entire family? Should we isolate their entire community? Remember all those questions that we had at the beginning, and a lot of times we still have those questions now, and those are going to be hard questions to answer with Omicron and things like that. All of that can be understood if we collect really good data and if we have really good data science to be able to discern those differences. Finally, this was our wastebasket term. This was build core capabilities. What I want to highlight here, though, one of the things this is like being able to make PPE and doing clinical trials networks, all goodness. I actually want to highlight manufacturing here briefly. So one of the things that we learned with this pandemic is that we were able to make quite a bit of vaccine doses in a relatively short period of time. Again, our ability to scale vaccines was unprecedented. We did that a lot faster than people have been able to do previously. but it wasn't fast enough, right? So as much as I can say, hey, look how great we did, wouldn't it have been great if we had 200 million doses in January? Wouldn't it have been great if we had 3 billion doses this summer? What we could have done to export, what we could have done to be, how much we could have had an impact on the global vaccination campaign, and who knows if we could have squelched some of the variants, and we certainly could have made a huge difference in terms of human lives. And so that ability to scale manufacturing is critically important. Why am I highlighting it here? I think there's a ton of data science and there's a ton of data work that can be done in the manufacturing space. Some of this is quality systems, some of this is distributed manufacturing, some of this is just being able to optimize your current run so you can make a lot more in a current run. I hope I'm not boring you too much, but what I am trying to tell you though is that this is a huge, if I'm a student in biology and microbiology, I think you should develop the next vaccine against malaria because that's the coolest thing. The second coolest thing is manufacturing. I think there is extraordinary and tremendous opportunity for manufacturing expertise for that. It doesn't have to occur in the United States, but for us to have distributed manufacturing, because if we can, what we've learned from this pandemic is that we can develop a vaccine that's highly protective against a respiratory pathogen. I think the sky's the limit to develop a malaria vaccine, to develop vaccines against all sorts of pathogens that are currently plaguing us, but also just to make a ton of vaccines for diseases that we could potentially eliminate worldwide, hepatitis B, human papillomavirus. I mean, truly the sky's the limit on vaccinology. I think the science the technology, the RNA stuff, we have lots more work to do, but we have an ecosystem that's doing really well there. What we don't have is the ability to make billions of doses really, really fast. The world is going to be able to make probably 7 to 8 billion doses by the end of this year. It's coming soon, of a COVID vaccine. Never been done before. But if we can do that, just think about making 12 billion, 15 billion, 20 billion doses, and then just running your list of vaccine-preventable infectious diseases and taking them all off the table. So that's why I think you should go into vaccine manufacturing writ large. Plus, I also think there's a huge shortage in America right now, and so I think you do very well. So those are the main pillars. The last one is just that we're going to manage this as a big team. So what I want to do is wrap up with a couple other comments on kind of what I learned today with the different meetings and such that we had with Colorado State. The first is workforce. So the idea, why it's so great to come to university, it's invigorating for me personally. It gives me tons of hope for the next generation. But from a workforce standpoint, we are going to need professionals that will do better at pandemic response than people like me did in this response. So the idea of how do you train a community of public health experts, of medical experts, of data science experts, manufacturing experts, as I highlighted, I don't know the answer to that. What I think is that the best way to train that community is to train in two things. The first is you cross-train. And that's what I love about Colorado State, because when we talk about One Health, the opportunities that you have here is that you can cross-train in data science and public health and wildlife surveillance, as I just heard about, or whatever else it is. But the professional that's going to be ready for the next pandemic is going to be really good at all of those. But I do think, based on this talk, you got to know data and data science. I can't imagine any profession in the next 10 to 20 years where you're not going to have to be at least somewhat savvy in data and data science. But my charge to you as Colorado State is you really need to figure out how we train those professionals, and we have to do it differently. Because if you want to say, well, there was a lot of stuff we were missing in this pandemic that we should have done, this or that, I mean, we can talk about that all day, but it's ultimately about the people. And so, and the way that the people will do better for the next pandemic is that they are trained differently. So figure out how we train differently. The second is that I hope that you approach this with a sense of urgency and audacity. the beauty, again, of my experience at Warp Speed is that, like, every morning we're like, you know, these are lives saved or not. Like, it makes truly a difference what I do every day. And that was obviously very motivational. But then I would pose back to you, what are you working on now? And how does whatever you're working on have a less sense of urgency? If you're working on wastewater surveillance, as we heard about today, absolutely critical for this pandemic and for future pandemics. If you're working on wildlife surveillance, essential, because we have to be ready for the future pandemics. If you're working on cancer, what are you waiting for? And so the sense I hope I leave you with is this sense of urgency, this sense of audacity, that don't let anything get in your way, because not only is it future pandemic, but whatever that big problem is, we need you to solve it. Thank you very much.
I would like to introduce the panelists for our panel discussion. Raymond Goodrich, Executive Director of the Infectious Disease Research Center and Professor in the Department of Microbiology, Immunology, Pathology at CSU. Lyle Peterson, Director, Division of Vector-Borne Diseases, Center for Disease Control and Prevention, also here in Fort Collins. Heather Pidcoke, Chief Medical Research Officer, OVPR and Associate Research Director at TMI, the Translational Medicine Institute. Chris Myatt, Founder and Chief Innovation Officer at LightDeck Diagnostics. Emily King, Professor in the Department of Mathematics. And Chaun Powell, Group Vice President of Premier, Inc. So each of the panelists will have an opportunity to pose a question to Dr. Hepburn. We'll start with Ray Goodrich.
So Matt, first of all, start off by saying thank you for your service
Thank
in
you.
the past, as well as thank you for the service that you're providing on behalf of the nation at present. Really terrific. Enjoyed the talk, enjoyed the discussions today. I think you said we don't want to go back, and there's also sort of this tenet, and I've experienced it myself, that memory of disaster that affects our decision-making lasts for about 3 years. And I know that you talked about the fact that there are several things, and I heard you say it repeatedly today, the ability to pivot and the private-public partnerships being essential. So I guess my question would be, in the next 3 years, what do you see focusing on to emphasize those things, to make them easier to happen from your position and your perspective?
No, thank you for that. So I think, can you hear me okay? Super. So it's a great question, right? And I think it is going to happen. It is already happening. We just want to put the pandemic in our rearview mirror, move on. And it's happening in the federal government and state government and local government and throughout our society, that we just want it to be over. The hard part is that we can't do that. First of all, we have to get through this one, but we have to prepare for the next one, and that's going to take a ton of effort, that's going to take a ton of resources, and that's going to take commitment. We need places like Colorado State to commit to that. One of what Ray was alluding to is a concept here, though, of what do we need to do to get ready for the next one? I talked about data science here. One of the, I think, best ideas that I've heard on this is that what we need to do is we need to practice things that are absolutely essential to do during a pandemic, but they may not necessarily be working on COVID, or they may not necessarily be working on influenza or something like that. So it's the stuff. Let me try to give you an example. The idea of being able to run, again, 1.5 million diagnostic tests per day, I think is awesome. Think about if we could do that type of diagnostic output testing for all sorts of different infectious diseases. Think about if we could do that kind of testing for HIV or hepatitis C or for sexually transmitted infections. So the idea of resourcing and testing for sexually transmitted infections, for being able to test rapidly for being able to treat and to ensure that that contagious disease doesn't go to other people, well, that's kind of what we needed to do for COVID as well. So again, I think there's tremendous opportunity. If we have to be super clever on this. We have to do things differently, because that's not how stovepipe government funds stuff. But think about if we could eliminate hepatitis C, or we could massively reduce the number of sexually transmitted infections in the United States. And all of that is in the service of making sure that we're ready to respond to future pandemics. There's a lot of other examples that we can also talk about in that space. I talk about being able to manufacture antibodies really quickly. If we made antibodies for other infections, that'd be great. A lot of the antibody products are actually cancer treatments. So think about making the next generation antibody against a cancer and doing that at highest quality for safety and effectiveness, but also manufacturing it at scale really, really quickly. Well, not only are we going to be able to treat that cancer better, now again, we're practicing for that future pandemic response.
Yeah, thank you for that excellent talk. One of the things I think at CDC that we've learned the hard way was we really weren't prepared from a data science standpoint. And I think that's been well documented elsewhere. We've been trashed pretty heavily about that. But and so we're learning fast, but I think as you pointed out, there's a whole public health system out there at many levels, like state, local health departments, who I suspect are even less prepared. So how do you see the role of universities in helping the public health system prepare from a data science standpoint?
Yeah, so super question, Lyle. And I think, yeah, one of my favorites. I think, so first of all, it's here right now because you're co-located with Colorado State University. There's just unique, extraordinary opportunity right here, right now, with this integration between CDC and Colorado State. And I'd love to see this occur in 50 other cities across America. It doesn't have to be CDC necessarily, but this idea of government, it could be a state health department or a local health department, incredibly closely embedded and affiliated with a university ecosystem so that you would get best of both worlds. I think it's the perfect question for this group, for academics, because it's truly, I think, it's a new way of training, it's a new way of thinking. I think there's tons of technology that can be used for collecting data, for reporting data. We have all these data systems that really do need to be updated, that we need to be able to get the information flow so that it goes seamlessly and easy. So that's government bureaucracy work and resources that absolutely have to be done, but that's the boring part. The exciting part, I think, for this group is how do you train and develop the next generation public health leader? And what type of education do they need? I mean, I come from the military. One of the things the military does is you go through a whole process throughout your career of professional development that's well laid out because you need to command and you go to school and you need to command and you do these different experiences. That's what I would love for the academic community, the schools of public health, but not just the schools of public health, for the data science centers and such, to say, this is the absolutely essential skill set that the future public health professional is going to need. So thanks.
I loved your comments. I think it's so important not to go back to the way that we were doing things before. There's been a lot of talk in the last 15 years about translational research and what that means. And one of the things that I think I've heard in almost every translational research talk I've ever seen is about the Valley of Death and how we have great funding for basic science and discovery work. We have investors who are willing to invest in technologies once they're proven, but we don't have any funding in that middle space. I started out at the U.S. Army Institute of Surgical Research in San Antonio, which I know you're familiar with because you were at Brook.
That's right.
But the thing they did really well is that there was data collection, there was data review, there was an analysis of what was killing people, what was hurting people, what was causing people harm, and then there was coordination of resources. And I'm wondering if there's any conversation at a national level that we need to have an agency, not siloed agencies like BARDA, DARPA, all of this, military, but an overall review. What is hurting the American people? What is killing the American people? And how do we put money at developing the discovery work that's going to cause those solutions?
Yeah. So let me answer on the Colorado state level and then the national level, actually, because the first half day was spent in the Translation Medicine Institute, which is an amazing building, by the way. So, but also, it's a Translation Medicine Institute. So I want to highlight two things. The first is that whether it's human or it's veterinary, I don't care. It's the idea of the clinical aspects, the scientific aspects, and the data aspects all being blended into one. And again, that's what you're doing here at Colorado State, and that's what you should do. And I think, in particular, Michael was presenting and had I love the water cooler. So he has a water cooler slide, which brings sort of the scientists and the clinicians kind of together around the water cooler. But that's, let me try to explain it. Our data projects fail because the data scientists have no idea what the clinicians are talking about, and the clinicians have no idea what the data science are talking about. So you either get, you get, I can't tell you the number of these data science algorithms, and we spend 6 months on these projects, and they say, if the patient's blood pressure is getting really, really low, that's bad. That's sort of like, yeah. Okay, so we should measure blood pressure. The point is you got to bring the two groups together, and I think there's a lot of initiative here that does that. So I'm very happy to see that, and I think that's part of the solution that we have to do. The other part, though, that I've always known this, but I will really want to say this to this audience because Alan and I were talking about this today, is that the idea of One Health, I think we all agree in terms of the importance of it, and you're clearly living it here. But I still think we really silo, and we say, I'm a wildlife person, or I'm a vet person, I'm a large animal vet person, or I'm a this, and I'm a data scientist, and I'm a clinician. So I'm the worst at siloing because I have no idea what's going on in those other fields. The point is, why are we doing that? One of the things that I thought was really cool today was your veterinary diagnostics laboratory. When the call came and said, hey, we need you to run human COVID diagnostic testing, they stepped up. And they had the quality systems in place where they were able to do that. I think that's a model for our nation for future pandemics. I think you can set a standard of why couldn't every veterinary diagnostic lab be at least enough quality standard that they would pivot to future human diagnostic testing when they needed to. It's, again, this concept of pivot and exercise and preparing, or pivot back. If there's a huge ASF outbreak in the United States, can we use human diagnostic labs to take care of, if there's a surge in samples that we need to test? We need to pivot back and forth. Why can't we pivot back and forth? Well, it's regulatory and FDA and stuff like that. But really, it's about that we don't cross talk and we don't cross communicate. And I think this is a great place to do that. Another example is with we were talking to the wildlife group, and I sort of had this thing went off in my head that it was like, the people that go out there and, are swabbing bats and stuff like that in these crazy places, and they're heroes, and I would not want to do that, but they're heroes. But it's like, there's a similar, there's an analogous need for sample collection and preservation to be able to send those back to diagnostic labs for all of our infectious diseases. And if we really want to do home health, we have to get really, really good at sample collection and preservation. So there's a huge overlap. So why couldn't a wildlife collection person then pivot to home health, right? Because fundamentally, it's almost the same thing, but we never do that. So, but we can. Anyway, so sorry to digress on that. I think from a national standpoint, though, this valley of death is problematic. I think we're looking in terms of our plan to say, look, if we're going to do that part seriously, we have to resource it. But the way I would flip the equation on this a little bit is to say, instead of the valley of death, let's say for a vaccine is going to cost you a $300 to $500 million phase 3 efficacy trial, and let's say same amount or more in terms of manufacturing a significant quantity of doses, okay? So that's just a ton of money. So as much as we would, we'd like to solve the problem, but the problem is it's going to be super expensive every time we do this. Is there a way we could reduce the cost? So, and the way that those are the two examples we brought up a little bit today. So if we get really good at scaled manufacturing, distributed manufacturing, data science to predict how to optimize yields in manufacturing, you could substantially reduce that cost. Reducing that cost makes it cheaper, but also gets these things done a lot faster. There's huge opportunity there. It's the same thing in clinical trials. If we can figure out a way to reduce the cost of clinical trials, virtual clinical trials, electronic informed consent, if you can lower the cost, then, again, for the same amount of money, you can take 3 to 5 drugs through the valley of death.
Matt,
Hey, Chris.
great comments, great discussion. Your talk reminded me of the quip from Wayne Gretzky, I don't skate to where the puck is, I skate to where the puck is going to be.
That's right.
So one thing you brought up, and I think it's particularly interesting from a data science perspective, there's been a huge amount of effort towards the kind of prognostic testing or frankly just prediction, because I think it's more than testing. It's going to take other variables and other clinical observations or inputs to be able to take very complex diseases like COVID. Are you going to wind up on a ventilator? Sepsis, what is the potential outcome going to be there? Even like converting from latent tuberculosis to active tuberculosis. Complex sets of biomarkers and what goes on. And so I think it's a big data science challenge of how do we take all the information that's out there. Tons of papers have been put out on this, and how do we turn that into actionable, here's what a set of tests should be, or an algorithm that helps to direct care to the right folks, or do clinical trial enrichment as you suggested.
Yep. So I would start by establishing a data science center at Colorado State University. Maybe we'll go from there. But I think so. I'm not a data scientist, and so I'm getting all preachy. Like everybody needs to know data science except for me, because I don't seem to be able to learn it at this point in my life. I'm trying. I am really trying. You know where I think we're going to solve this, Chris, is inspiration from other fields, and it's not me, but it's like, again, we went to the center today that's working here on campus with NOAA and weather forecasting and understanding storms and getting, massive amounts of data downloaded daily from satellites, and how do they process those massive data sets and make sense of them. I think we're going to get solutions from all of those fields that are having success with messy data sets, with missing data, with a lot of signal to noise problem. What I do think, though, again, I'm kind of going back to, I don't think for health that we can just kind of take everything and throw it all in and hope it works out. I think we have to be much more deliberate about stuff that we already know and kind of take that as a known. So for example, it's like if you're worried about severity or progression of COVID to ending up in the intensive care unit, we know that age is a really, really big predictor. So that's already known. Let's start there and then build our data sets and our analytics kind of from there. And so, but I think it's going to be learned. I love. There's these arguments like, oh, well, Google does this for a living and Google will do this for us. But what I really love about having this at an academic institution is that it will be driven sort of, it's not just, okay, we're driving towards a solution and then we're going to patent the algorithm and we're going to make a product and we're going to move on to the next problem. Like it's truly understanding and embracing that problem and truly kind of learning to advance the field, so advancing the field in health, and then we have impacts on weather and climate change and all those other data problems too.
Hi, so the problem with there being such a great discussion with so many illustrious people is by the time you get to the second to last person, pretty much all of my
out of questions.
questions have been asked.
Okay.
But I'll kind of drill down something specifically. So I'm in the math department. I teach in the data science program. And so that's a program for people who want to get a degree in data science. But as you mentioned, data science is a field that is important to pretty much any student on campus today could make use of some sort of data science. So something that has been a discussion in a few different meetings at the Data Science Research Institute is, what can we do to create good quality data science courses or modules that can help serve the community here at CSU? So I guess what I'm asking is, are there any kind of really interesting techniques that you as a self-proclaimed non-data scientist saw during the entire warp speed process where you're like, oh, that's really cool that this person brought up this technique I haven't seen before, or something on the flip side you're like, well, I really wish I knew how to do X.
Yeah. So and I'll kind of flip the question a little bit, and I'll put a little bit of a burden on the administration here instead of the faculty. So sorry about this, man. So I think what I've seen in these data science projects is that, again, it's the garbage in, garbage out, and it's if you can create the well-curated, sensible, filled in as best you can data set, then the sky's the limit in terms of the analytics. And I love the idea of the project-based learning. And one of the things that, Michael, I remember you did really well on the project we worked together with was this idea of, hey, Matt, okay, we got the data set. We're going to try like 7 different techniques, and we're going to figure out where the strengths and limitations are of each. And I think what you see a lot is people are like, I'm going to use this. And Michael did just the opposite. But in order, you got to have the substrate, and this is where you got to have those well-curated, awesome data sets that will inspire the students that it's not just some terrible project that they're going to do the night before, the exam night or exam day, but rather it's like, oh my God, like I can figure out COVID severity, or I can learn something new about the spread of this infectious disease to enable us to contain it and stop it. Those types of inspirational, important, well-curated data sets, first of all, they take a lot of work to set those up. But secondly, is sometimes you're gonna have to go out and get them. And one of the conversations we've been having a lot today is, for example, if a pharmaceutical company has a really important, well-curated data set that's underanalyzed, it would be great to bring that into the university environment, because then it becomes, if you will, a treasure trove for you to experiment and learn and students to work on it. We always talk about that, but that's super hard to do. And I think a lot of times it gets caught up in well, if we develop an algorithm, who gets the IP for it, and do we have these agreements in place? And then sometimes I've seen data use agreements, like it takes a year to negotiate these things. So again, those are hard problems to solve. But ideally, if the richness of the data sets are there, then you're going to be able to inspire the students to do awesome stuff.
Dr. Hepburn, thank you again for your comments today. My name is Chaun, and I represent a company that aggregates the purchasing power of hospitals across the country. We've got 4,000 hospitals and 200,000 non-acutes. I'm going to speak to your 4th pillar for just a second and then conclude with a question, but I just really want to re-articulate the importance of what you suggested around manufacturability, and to give you a couple ideas of how we worked with the government throughout the pandemic to really think through this. I'll give you a couple statistics. When the world shut down, we stopped producing fuel. When we stopped producing fuel, we didn't have isopropyl alcohol. We used a 20-year-old database, connecting the dots to some of my predecessors here, that has 100 billion different data points for hospital and healthcare purchases to identify that there are 7,200 unique SKUs, unique items that use isopropyl alcohol in healthcare. How do you predict which one's going to be the next one that's going to be back ordered? And how do you make sure that you have all the swabs to get vaccinations administered when you don't know what that next one's going to be? Another classic example, that SMS, which is the raw material that is used in all the masks that the majority of us are wearing. 43,000 SKUs, 43,000 unique items that use that raw material, from diapers to ice packs to masks to gowns. And so when you think about not just, all right, we now have access to the data to understand that there's 43,000 potential products that we need to back up and have backup inventory for, but then going to what Dr. Hepburn said to say, can we ramp manufacturing specifically of N95s when the entire globe is trying to do it? And so Dr. Hepburn also spoke to the fact that nobody, well, maybe a handful of the folks on Warp Speed thought that they could do what they did with Warp Speed. Many people don't think that, you know, you can find a way to manufacture brand new N95 masks overnight and you figure it out, and we did that too. Yeah. And then we've got human challenges with nurses that you can't just put through a processing machine, and there's going to be a tremendous shortage for these. Yeah. You look at some of the programs that were put in place, Dr. Hepburn, including Operation Warp Speed, including AirBridge, which was a government-run program to try and accelerate moving product and production overseas back to the United States, which did great things. It also put tremendous strain on some of those supply chains. And so my point here is there are a lot of elements that need data scientists and data analytics to be able to utilize, to be able to not only predict and prevent those next pandemics, but also arm our frontline caregivers, whether it be an animal or whether it be in human, that are critical. And so I just wanted to share that as some additional evidence for you all. My question for you, which, first of all, thank you for...
I was just going to agree.
Perfect. That was an easy one to finish with then. My question for you, and I would be remiss if I didn't say thank you for being a patriot of this great nation. There were a tremendous number of incredible projects that occurred that didn't get as much airtime as Warp Speed or AirBridge or some of these others. And I'm just curious if there's one collaboration that you saw or participated in.
I'm glad you brought that up.
That
So first of all, in the supply chain, you're spot on, and what we with this plan that I was presenting in that core capabilities, there's also a section on supply chain and supply chain analysis, and again, like I have no idea how to do that. I don't. But what we're going to do is build a government team to be able to really dig in there. And the issue is to be able to, it's exactly like you described, but also, I guess what we're imagining, it doesn't have to be in the United States, and most of our supply chain is going to be global, and you can't make it, purely domestic. But what we can do is if we nurture a biotech and we really nurture a manufacturing ecosystem in the United States at steady state, that and that you may be making something slightly different, but it's a really easy pivot to masks. And so this type of pivoting and flexible manufacturing and 3D printing and additive manufacturing and all of that, it's such a ripe space for technological development. I'm just profoundly excited about it, and I'm sort of preaching to the students and saying, look, you got to go there. It's really cool stuff. But it's all data-driven. It's all data-driven, and the better that we get at predicting those things, the better that we will be able to make vaccines and, frankly, everything else. And if you want to talk about national competitiveness and you want to talk about nurturing our economy, it's that data science that will drive it. I want to make a slightly different point that to answer your question, though, and it's about telling good news stories. And you're spot on. There were tons of good news stories. There are in this pandemic, sort of the best of human nature, the best of caring for your neighbors, the best. Again, America is not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but I always think America at our best is like we help each other out. You know, we work as a team. We take care of our people. We take care of our neighbors. And so, I saw so much of that. But what you prompted me to remind is that I'm hoping this community can help tell those good news stories. I'm trying to do this at a national level, because people need to hear it, right? Like you don't need to read the news every day about how divided we are. We know that. It's terrible. Can we at least balance that by looking at some of the great things we did? I'm glad you brought up nurses. I mean, thousands of nurses. I mean, heroes throughout this pandemic. But you guys have those stories here too. I mean, I heard today, all day, about the different ways that Colorado State really stepped up in this pandemic, worked as a team, volunteered, you know, and took the initiative and did these things. The president presented that, had a great list for us. So it's a great way to end is tell your stories. First, publish your papers. There were a couple times I'm like, and the students are like, yeah, I know. But the point is, like, if you did something great, especially if it's COVID related, what are you waiting for? The world scientific community needs to see what you're doing. So we got to get those messages out from a scientific and technical standpoint, but also just from a tell the stories in the local communities, tell the stories at the state level. At the White House level, we're going to look to tell stories. What I hope we could do is tell stories like Colorado State, where people got together as a community and really address this pandemic.
Thanks very much, everyone. I'd like to thank the panel for participating and posing all these excellent questions. So the panel consists of Dr. Goodrich, Dr. Peterson, Dr. Pidcoke, Dr. Myatt, Dr. Emily King, and Chaun Powell. Thanks very much. And I want to thank Matt Hepburn once again. What a fabulous, informational, inspirational talk he gave this afternoon. In particular, the word team, I think, was echoed over and over. And I feel that CSU really is a team. And I think that one of the things that the Data Science Research Institute has really attempted to do is to cross across campus and to be integrative, inclusive, to make data science something that everybody can do and really increase participation in data science. And so there's some great problems here in data science, right? And there are a lot of fantastic challenges that we can address in infectious disease. We've started, but we've really only started. And there are a lot of great opportunities as we move forward. So I hope everyone wants to become an affiliate faculty member or a student affiliate in Data Science Research Institute. And thanks again to everybody. All day we had a fantastic group from CSU, from the morning, 8:30, from all of the folks that have helped build this together, put this together. And it's just been a wonderful event. So let me thank everybody, but in particular our speaker, Matt Hepburn. And next week is finals week, so everyone go home and crack the book. Thank you.